In 2018, a young couple vanished near the Hollywood sign after posting a single selfie, smiling, unaware. For years, no one knew what happened. Then, 7 years later, a mysterious indie film emerged, mirroring their final moments in chilling detail. What began as a missing persons case unraveled into something far darker, as buried footage, eerie coincidences, and one desperate mother uncovered a truth no one was ready to face. The California sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long golden rays over the city of Los Angeles. It was the kind of Sunday afternoon where the air felt soft against your skin, tinged with the scent of eucalyptus and faintly burnt brush. For locals, it was a day for iced coffee and city views. For tourists, a perfect chance to hike toward the iconic Hollywood sign. For Ethan Morales and Marissa Young, it was a milestone. They had just moved into a shared apartment in Burbank 3 months ago, after dating for over a year and talking for many more. This afternoon was meant to be memorable, a casual hike to one of the most photographed backdrops in the world, followed by dinner in Los Feliz. Maybe even a spontaneous stop for vegan donuts on Sunset. Marissa had posted a photo at exactly 4:17 p.m. It showed her leaning playfully against a wooden railing, Ethan's arm barely in frame, a wide sky behind them. The caption read simply, "Finally here." There were 2 likes in the first minute, and then silence. The first real worry began hours later, when Ethan's mother, Gloria, texted to ask how the hike had gone. No response. That wasn't too strange. Coverage up there could be spotty. She waited. By 9:30 p.m., she had tried both their phones. Ethan's went straight to voicemail. Marissa's rang once, then stopped. Gloria assumed they must have gotten delayed. Maybe dinner ran long. Maybe they were taking a lift home. It wasn't until 11:45 p.m. that a thread of dread began to wrap around her chest. She texted again, simple but sharp. "Where are you?" Marissa's roommate, Tasha, woke to 4 missed calls from Gloria. She hadn't seen Marissa since that morning, and thought she was spending the night at Ethan's. A quick call to Ethan's roommate, Sean, confirmed the opposite. Ethan had told him they were just going hiking and would be back by evening. He hadn't seen or heard from him since. Panic now rippled through both households. Calls were made. Friends messaged. Locations shared. No updates. No answers. By 2 a.m., Gloria filed a missing persons report. The next morning, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Search and Rescue were dispatched to Brush Canyon Trail, where a park ranger confirmed that a vehicle matching Ethan's dark blue Hyundai Elantra had been parked near the lot since at least late Sunday afternoon. It was still there, neatly parked, doors locked. No damage. No signs of forced entry. Inside, the keys were in the center console. A water bottle in the cup holder was half full. Ethan's phone, powered off and wedged between the seat cushions, showed a dead battery. Marissa's phone was not found. An early search of the surrounding area yielded nothing. No personal items, no dropped belongings, no traces of struggle. Hikers who had been on the trail that day were questioned. Some remembered passing couples, solo walkers, photographers, but no one recalled a couple matching both Ethan and Marissa's descriptions. No one reported hearing screams or seeing anyone rush from the trail in panic. The area was scenic but notorious for its multiple offshoots and hidden paths. By Tuesday morning, the local news stations had picked up the story. Couple vanishes near Hollywood sign, one headline read. The image used was the last selfie Marissa had posted, now making its way across timelines and television screens. People commented beneath it with questions, prayers, wild theories. Some swore they'd seen something that day. Most hadn't. Detectives began interviewing friends and family. Ethan, 28, was an aspiring documentary editor who had left his job at a local media company a month prior. Marissa, 26, was working remotely as a graphic designer for a small publishing house in Portland. They were quiet, introverted, not the kind to elope or vanish for thrills. They paid their bills, returned calls, and had plans for the fall, a wedding in her hometown in Illinois, maybe even a road trip up the coast. There was nothing to suggest they had been involved in anything risky. No financial problems, no known enemies, no drug use. Their digital footprints ended that Sunday. No outgoing messages, No app usage, no bank activity. Just that last image. Search efforts ramped up. Helicopters with infrared cameras scanned the hills. Dog teams traced every fork and incline. The terrain was steep but manageable, popular with fitness enthusiasts and influencers alike. Nothing turned up. No footprints that went unaccounted for. No pieces of clothing. Only the wind, hot and dry, sweeping through the brush as if erasing every trace behind it. By Friday, detectives publicly announced they were deeply concerned. But off record, many quietly admitted they were puzzled. How could two healthy, able-bodied adults vanish so completely on a trail known for its moderate foot traffic and city views? Theories started to fester. An accident? Maybe they had fallen into a ravine or crevice. But where? Every drop-off had been combed. Had they wandered off trail and gotten lost? But why leave the path so close to sunset, with no gear, no flashlight, no food? And why together? Or had someone been waiting? It was an unsettling idea, and one that brought little comfort. But investigators had to ask it. Had someone followed them up, lured them, or worse, had they staged their disappearance? But that theory wilted under scrutiny. Their accounts were untouched, their social media silent, their apartments undisturbed. As the first week passed, the trailhead became a kind of shrine. Friends left candles, flowers, messages scrawled on poster boards. Come home. We're still looking. You are loved. What had started as a simple hike to capture a beautiful moment had transformed into a waking nightmare. 2 lives vanished beneath the sun-soaked hills of Los Angeles, with only a photograph and an idle car left behind. The days after Ethan and Marissa's disappearance blurred into one another. Media attention swelled, then ebbed, leaving only the immediate families to feel the ache of unanswered questions. Reporters had already moved on to newer headlines, but for those who knew them, life refused to resume its normal rhythm. Gloria Morales, Ethan's mother, spent her mornings rereading their last text exchange. He had sent her a photo of the view from Griffith Park just 2 days before the hike. "We should come back up here sometime, Mom," it read. Marissa's mother, Elaine Young, took a more reserved approach. She avoided interviews, rarely spoke to press, but when the detective handling the case asked for background on their relationship, she opened up. Sitting at her kitchen table in Glendale, clutching a mug of chamomile tea that had long gone cold, Elaine admitted the past few months hadn't been picture-perfect for the young couple. They had only just moved in together, she said, her voice steady but faint. It had been maybe 8 weeks. Marissa was excited at first, nervous too. But then, she started sounding tired on the phone. You know, that kind of tired where it's not about being busy? It's emotional, like worn thin from walking on eggshells. According to Elaine, Marissa had called her twice in the last month to vent about Ethan. He quit his job, Elaine said quietly, as if still afraid to say it too loud. Said he needed to clear his head, that he wanted to work on something independent. But they had bills, rent, and she didn't feel ready to carry all of that on her own. Detectives dug into that timeline. Ethan had left his job at Atlas Media, a boutique production company in Silver Lake, 2 months prior. He hadn't been fired. According to HR, he had resigned abruptly after a meeting with a legal consultant from the company's compliance team. Nothing major, just internal restructuring, they claimed. But to coworkers, his departure had felt odd. He didn't throw a farewell lunch. He didn't say goodbye. He just stopped showing up. One of his former colleagues, a post-production assistant named Devin, agreed to speak with detectives. He was polite, in his mid-20s, and clearly uncomfortable. He fidgeted with the cuff of his jacket as he spoke. "I mean, Ethan was good at what he did," Devin said. "He worked late, took weird passion projects nobody wanted. But something changed this year. He got jumpy, like paranoid. When pressed, Devin recounted an incident about 5 weeks before Ethan left. He got an email, he said. I didn't see the content, but I remember his reaction. It was after hours, most of us were gone. I came back to grab my headphones, and he was just sitting there, staring at his screen. Pale as hell. When I asked if he was okay, he just said, "It's from someone I used to know. They shouldn't have my address." Then he shut the laptop and left. IT records confirmed that Ethan had received an encrypted email that night from a Proton Mail account. The subject line was, "Still remember what you cut." The message body had been deleted. No trace remained on his hard drive. He never reported it. Police interviewed Marissa's co-workers too. She had been remote, working as a layout designer for a Portland-based publisher. Her output had dropped slightly in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, but she still hit deadlines. What stood out, however, was a call she made to her supervisor the Thursday before the hike. She asked about transferring to part-time. The manager explained. Said she needed more flexibility, that her boyfriend was going through something and she wanted to be there for him. When asked if Marissa sounded distressed, the supervisor hesitated. No, not distressed, but tired, like she wasn't sleeping well. Friends confirmed a similar pattern. One of Marissa's oldest college roommates, Jules, who lived in Santa Monica, said Marissa had visited her about 2 weeks earlier. "We went for brunch," Jules recalled. "She looked great, but had this energy, like she wanted to talk, but didn't know how." Eventually, she said, "Do you think people can actually leave the past behind?" I joked, "Only if they delete their Facebook," and she didn't laugh. She just said, "Ethan's past is trying to find him." That statement stuck with the detectives. They started examining Ethan's early life more closely, especially the years before he moved to LA. Records showed he had studied film at Arizona State University and then interned with a controversial filmmaker who had been accused, though never charged, of unethical practices in a now-defunct true crime series. Ethan had edited one episode that was later pulled from airing due to sensitive legal exposure. It involved a missing person case where the suspect eventually sued for defamation. Could that be connected? Had someone associated with that case contacted him again? Was it a coincidence that he went missing in almost the same narrative frame as the stories he once worked on? The detectives added these questions to their mounting list. Back in their shared apartment, Sean, Ethan's roommate before moving in with Marissa, finally allowed officers to search Ethan's desk drawer. Among scattered notebooks and USB drives was a torn envelope, unmarked but for a short handwritten phrase on the flap. "Never forget where we buried it." There was no return address. The handwriting didn't match Ethan's, and no one could identify it. The envelope was empty. Marissa's room in the apartment was sparse. She kept her things tidy, 2 suitcases neatly tucked into the closet, a sketchbook on a nightstand. Her last drawing was of a trail winding between hills, with 2 tiny figures holding hands in the distance. On the back of the page, in pencil, she had scribbled, "If we vanish, does the world notice right away, or only when the silence drags too long?" Outside the window, the world kept spinning, trucks honking, people jogging past, life continuing, but inside their story, the air had grown still. Something had cracked between them in those final weeks. Not loud, not explosive, but slow. Erosion, not eruption. Trust, dissolving quietly under the weight of something neither had spoken aloud. And yet, the day they disappeared had begun like any other. Breakfast, a shared Spotify playlist, a half tank of gas. They had smiled into the camera. They had taken a photo. So what changed between the shutter click and the silence that followed? By the end of the first full week, detectives had combed through every digital trace Ethan and Marissa might have left behind, but the trail ended far earlier than anyone had hoped. In the age of smartphones and constant connectivity, the absence of data was not only strange, it was alarming. Marissa's phone, unlike Ethan's, was never recovered, and her carrier records indicated that the last time it had connected to a cell tower was at 10:13 a.m. the morning of their hike. After that, nothing. No calls, no messages, no GPS data. Forensics confirmed what they feared. Her phone had been placed on airplane mode at some point between breakfast and the start of their ascent. That alone didn't suggest malice. Many hikers switch off signals to preserve battery, but eliminated any possibility of tracking their route that afternoon. There was no Strava data, no AllTrails log, no timestamp check-ins on Google Maps. They had become invisible the moment they left the paved road. Detectives scoured their home for clues. Printouts, handwritten notes, maps, receipts, anything that might indicate a planned trail or route. But Ethan's backpack, found in the trunk of his car, only contained 2 water bottles, a crumpled park brochure from the LA tourism office, and a protein bar. No itinerary, no map markings, no signs of a long trek. Marissa's belongings were limited to a light windbreaker and sunglasses left in the glove compartment. They spoke to rangers, trail volunteers, and regulars who frequented Brush Canyon. Dozens were interviewed. Some remembered a couple walking uphill that afternoon, a woman with auburn hair, a man in a baseball cap, but details varied wildly. Some placed them near the fire road. Others were sure they'd seen them on the western overlook. No description was solid enough to confirm identity, and none of the sightings were time-stamped. Not one person could definitively say they had seen Ethan and Marissa after 4 p.m. The only verifiable evidence was that last photo posted to Marissa's Instagram. Taken from what appeared to be a scenic overlook roughly halfway up the trail, the image showed her smiling with sunlight behind her and the faint curve of the Griffith Observatory visible in the distance. Ethan's shoulder was partially in frame, blurry and mid-turn, like he had been caught just as he stepped away. The caption, "Finally here," was simple, celebratory, and yet strangely final. Forensic experts examined the image. There were no hidden reflections, no anomalies in the shadows. Metadata confirmed it was taken at 4:17 p.m. local time. The geotag matched Brush Canyon, but only within a general radius, not precise enough to pin the exact location. Marissa's phone uploaded the photo, then logged out. No further activity. Ethan's device, found drained inside the car, offered no additional clues. There were no new photos, no voice memos, no half-typed messages left unsent. Just a normal browser history, news articles, a recipe search for chickpea pasta, and a few Google queries about LA hiking trails from 2 nights earlier. Nothing unusual. Detectives began reaching out to anyone else who might have crossed their path that weekend. They reviewed footage from nearby security cameras along Canyon Drive, but the parking area had no surveillance. The nearest working traffic cam was too far downhill to offer relevant insight. No one reported anything suspicious. No break-ins. No lost dogs. No strange men watching hikers. They pulled credit card records, hoping for a charge from a coffee shop or gas station near the trail that morning. Nothing. They hadn't stopped for snacks. They hadn't purchased sunscreen. They left no financial imprint that day. It was as if they had walked into the hillside and evaporated. And yet, people don't just vanish. Investigators turned to more unconventional tools. A civilian drone team volunteered to scan the surrounding hills with high-res infrared, though weather interference limited their range. The LAPD's Missing Persons Division connected with a behavioral analysis consultant, a former FBI profiler, who reviewed the case. His report was brief but chilling. There's a window between the selfie at 4:17 p.m. and sunset at 6:53 p.m., he wrote. That's when something happened. If it were an accident, it likely occurred soon after the photo, before fatigue or low light could become factors. If it was a choice, voluntary or coerced, it would have required deliberation. The profiler added a note that caught everyone's attention. The body language in the selfie suggests disconnection. She's smiling at the camera. He is walking away. That observation, while subjective, began to frame the photo in a different light. Was Ethan already distracted in that moment? Was something wrong? Did he step away to take a call? Was Marissa covering discomfort with a smile? Digital forensic specialists ran additional analysis on Marissa's social media uploads, looking for pattern breaks. They noticed that she almost always tagged Ethan in her photos, but not this one. They found that unusual. More questions surfaced. Why didn't they bring more supplies? Why wasn't there a trail record? Why wasn't a location sharing feature turned on, especially if they'd argued in recent weeks? Detectives explored the possibility that they had chosen to disappear, but again, no supporting evidence existed. There were no hidden bank transfers, no bucks, no hidden cash stashes. Their lease was paid through the end of the month. They had left dishes drying in the sink, half a loaf of bread in the fridge. The silence from the trail, the absence of any direct witnesses, and the abrupt stop in digital footprints led to a grim but undeniable truth. No one actually saw Ethan or Marissa alive after 4:17 p.m. Not one person could confirm they had made it to the top. Not one surveillance image captured them on the descent. It was as if their lives hit pause, or stop, in the same moment the shutter clicked. It became the center of the case, the 417 hypothesis, as some officers began calling it. Everything that came before was concrete. Everything after was conjecture. At a press briefing 2 weeks in, the lead investigator gave a carefully worded statement. At this time, we have exhausted all traditional means of search and surveillance. We are urging anyone who was on or near the trail at Brush Canyon on Sunday, between 4 and 7 p.m., to come forward, even if you think your observation was irrelevant. No one did. It was as if Ethan and Marissa had chosen a clearing just outside the city on a warm, sunny afternoon, posted a final image for the world to see, and stepped into a part of the hillside that no map recognized and no memory could reclaim. Nearly a month had passed since Ethan and Marissa disappeared, and the hope of finding them alive had begun to dim under the weight of unanswered questions and relentless silence. The official search had scaled back after the first 2 weeks, resources redirected to more immediate emergencies across Los Angeles County, but their families refused to accept the absence of progress as closure. Gloria Morales joined a Facebook group dedicated to missing persons cases in Southern California, where she found herself in the company of strangers who knew all too well what it felt like to live inside a question mark. Elaine Young, quieter in grief, turned her energy into coordinating physical search efforts with local volunteers, hikers, rescue workers on break, even off-duty firefighters. They met every Saturday morning near Brush Canyon Trail, equipped with walkie-talkies, marked maps, and long sleeves to guard against the bramble. Most weekends yielded little more than sunburns, twisted ankles, and more theories than anyone needed, but the first weekend of November changed everything. That Friday night, a storm rolled in, unseasonal and sudden, with wind that swept through the hills and rain that soaked the city in cold, unexpected sheets. The next morning, as clouds gave way to pale sunshine, the search group resumed as usual, their boots squelching against muddy trails and freshly loosened earth. At around 10:42 a.m., a volunteer named Brian Curtis, a retired paramedic who had joined after seeing Marissa's photo on the news, took a detour off the main trail. The side path was narrow, partially overgrown, and led nowhere on the map. It was the kind of trail used only by animals or hikers looking to pee in private. And it was there, 20 paces in, nestled beneath a drooping bush whose branches still glistened with raindrops, that he found it, a single shoe. It was a women's trail runner, light gray with faded pink trim, laces still tied. Brian crouched down, careful not to disturb it. The toe was slightly caked with mud, but there was no blood, no torn fabric, no immediate sign of trauma. He radioed the team leader, who called it in. An officer arrived within 40 minutes. The shoe was photographed in place before being bagged and tagged. Gloria was called later that day. She came to the precinct with Elaine, her hands trembling as the evidence technician laid the shoe on the counter in a sealed bag. "That's hers," Gloria whispered. Elaine didn't speak. She only nodded, her face blank, her breath shallow. They had seen it before in her closet. Marissa had worn those shoes the weekend before the hike, and more importantly, she had been wearing them in the selfie, the telltale pink trim just barely visible at the bottom of the frame. Forensics confirmed the size and matched Marissa's known pair. There are no fingerprints, too much water damage, but no animal damage either. The shoe hadn't been dragged or chewed. It had been left. What did that mean? Detectives returned to the side path where the shoe was found. They followed the trail for another quarter-mile, where it curved uphill toward a rocky incline before disappearing into tangled thickets. Nothing else was found that day, but it reignited interest in the area. The following Saturday, a larger team set out again. Among them was Jordan Vu, a former wilderness guide from Pasadena who had quietly joined the search effort after reading about the case. He had an eye for terrain, for signs the average person overlooked. That morning, walking parallel to where the shoe had been found, he noticed a flash of silver tucked low in a thicket, a glint, half hidden beneath layers of damp leaves and broken branches. He called it out. A few others joined him to clear the area carefully. What they uncovered was a necklace. It was thin and delicate, the kind worn every day rather than for fashion, and though the clasp was snapped, the chain itself remained mostly intact. Dangling from the chain was a small round charm etched with the letter M. It had clearly been there a while, dirt pressed into the grooves, edges dulled, but it was unmistakably Marissa's. Gloria broke down when she saw it. "Ethan gave it to her," she said, holding it close to her chest as though it might warm her through memory. "It was for her birthday last year. He had it custom-made." Photos confirmed it, the charm visible in several of Marissa's older selfies, always resting just above the neckline of her shirts. She hadn't taken it off in over a year. Unlike the shoe, the necklace had more potential for forensic analysis. The lab found a few strands of hair tangled in the chain, too degraded for full DNA profiling, but consistent with Marissa's type. Again, no blood. No sign of violent removal. But how did her necklace end up caught in a bush, yards away from her shoe, both in places that would have been difficult to reach unintentionally? The find raised new possibilities. Maybe she had taken them off in a panic. Maybe she had run. Or maybe someone else had placed them there, accidentally or on purpose, days or weeks or months before. Theories flared again. Perhaps there had been an argument, and one of them stormed off. Perhaps one fell, and the other followed. Or perhaps, more chilling still, someone had intercepted them on the trail and led them somewhere else entirely. Investigators reopened drone footage and re-examined prior heat maps, but neither the shoe nor the necklace location had been searched early on. They had been too far off the main path. Jordan, the wilderness guide, offered another observation. He pointed out that the location of both items followed a rough northeast arc, not a clean line, but a possible pattern. It could suggest movement away from the overlook where the selfie was taken, movement into the undergrowth, but voluntary or forced. Gloria began visiting the site weekly, often alone. She would kneel where the necklace had been found, her fingers brushing the soil like it might still hold answers. Elaine came less often, but when she did, she stood quietly behind her, watching the treetops. On a particularly windy afternoon, while the others spread out across a dry creek bed further up the incline, Gloria wandered back to the original overlook, the one from the photo. She stared at the railing, weather-worn and split in some places, and tried to picture them standing here, smiling, turning, leaving. She looked past the edge toward the slope below, where loose rocks threatened anyone foolish enough to misstep. She thought of the necklace again, how its chain had snapped. Not ripped, not yanked, just broken. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind, wondering if the land remembered more than it let on. Time, despite its reputation for healing, had done little to soften the unanswered ache that lingered around the names Ethan Morales and Marissa Young. After 18 months of exhaustive search, intermittent leads, and inconclusive evidence, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially suspended the investigation, citing the lack of probable criminal activity. No bodies had been found, no suspects, no definitive signs of foul play. In bureaucratic terms, it was simply closed pending new evidence. But for Gloria, Ethan's mother, those words rang hollow. She refused to let it end there. She had grown thinner over the years, her hair grayer, her posture more stooped, but her determination calcified. Every season, without fail, she returned to Brush Canyon Trail with a fresh batch of missing posters, laminated against the weather, edges trimmed neatly. Sometimes she taped them near the trailhead. Other times, she tucked them discreetly into park brochures or posted them in gas station windows across Los Feliz and Burbank. She never stayed long, just enough to look at the hills once more and remind herself they had to be somewhere. Elaine Young, Marissa's mother, had chosen a quieter path. After the case was closed, she sold the Glendale house and moved north to Sonoma, where she worked part-time at Flower Nursery and tried not to speak of the past unless someone asked directly. And few did. Most people, with time, moved on. Photos were replaced. Messages stopped arriving. Online forums, once buzzing with theories, dulled into digital dust. It wasn't that people stopped caring. They just stopped believing anything new would come. And then, in the spring of the 7th year, something shifted. It began quietly, like most meaningful things do. An independent film titled The Lost Path began gaining modest traction in the underground circuit. Shot in a minimalistic, almost documentary style, it told the story of a couple who disappeared during a casual hike in the Hollywood Hills. At first, the film was dismissed as a moody fiction piece, a metaphorical exploration of emotional distance, loss, and disconnection. But those who had followed Ethan and Marissa's case couldn't help but notice the details. The setting was unmistakable. The way the camera lingered on the brushline trails, the view of the Griffith Observatory from just the right angle, the curvature of the dirt paths, even the parking lot layout, identical to Brush Canyon. But it wasn't just the geography that felt too real. It was the story. In the film, the characters, named Daniel and Elise, are a young couple struggling after the man abruptly quits his job in film production. They take a spontaneous hike to clear their heads. Along the way, tension builds. They argue off camera. The woman posts a photo mid-hike. She smiles. He turns away. She captions it, "Finally here." The line hit the few people who still followed the original case like a slap. The same caption Marissa used. The same timestamp. The same framing. It couldn't be coincidence. The film, directed by a relatively unknown filmmaker named Nolan Ray, premiered at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival to a modest crowd. But word spread quickly. A retired journalist who had covered the initial disappearance saw the screening and reached out to Gloria. The next day, Gloria watched it on a borrowed laptop at her kitchen table. Halfway through, she paused it and stood still for several minutes, unable to speak. She didn't need to finish it to know. Someone had taken their story. Gloria emailed the festival committee, then the filmmaker, then the producer listed on the end credits. She didn't accuse. She asked, where did the inspiration come from? Had someone submitted this story? Were the actors briefed on the real-life case? She received no answer for weeks. But the film's buzz grew. A niche streaming platform picked it up for release. Think pieces emerged online. Is The Lost Path based on real disappearances? Most speculative, some oddly dismissive. But one independent blog broke down shot comparisons. Frame by frame, they lined up the movie scenes with publicly available photos from Ethan and Marissa's social media. The shoe, the view, the necklace. Even the actor's wardrobe mimicked details Gloria hadn't realized were public. Elise wore a windbreaker with the same color scheme as Marissa's. Daniel carried a water bottle model Ethan used. In a now-deleted interview, the film's lead actress let slip that most of the script was based on old forum threads and a Reddit deep dive. That comment lit a small fire online. Investigators were pulled back in, informally at first, then officially. Gloria printed screenshots, emails, timestamps. She sent them to the detective who had once handled the case. She didn't want revenge. She wanted clarity. Had someone used insider knowledge? Was the filmmaker someone who knew Ethan? Had this been a twisted homage or a buried confession? Curious journalists began digging into Nolan Ray's background. Public records showed he had briefly attended UCLA Film School before dropping out in 2016. Yearbooks and LinkedIn history revealed a roommate named Dylan Vaughn. Dylan, it turned out, had interned at Atlas Media, the same boutique production company where Ethan had worked before quitting. The connection was thin, but real. When asked in a podcast interview about whether his film had drawn from real events, Nolan hesitated. Then he said, "Sometimes stories find you, especially the ones no one else bothered to finish." That line unsettled everyone. The streaming release was postponed pending legal review. Ethan and Marissa's families demanded transparency, though they stopped short of litigation. They didn't want the film pulled. They wanted to know how it had mirrored their lives so precisely. And then, in an anonymous package mailed to Gloria's house, no return address, just a postmark from North Hollywood, was a USB drive. The note inside read, "Watch what they cut." She plugged it into her laptop, hands shaking, eyes bracing for horror. Instead, what loaded was a raw clip, unpolished, unscored, unedited. A long, handheld tracking shot of a trail view at dusk. The camera shakes slightly, then steadies. It pans across a clearing, over a thicket of bushes, before settling on an empty overlook. The shot holds, long enough to catch something barely visible at the edge of the frame. A backpack, half hidden, dusty. It was the same brand Ethan owned, the same color. And beneath it, near the strap, something small and glinting. Possibly metal. Possibly. Gloria leaned closer to the screen, frozen. The still image paused on Gloria's laptop screen had haunted her sleep for days. The backpack and the raw film footage matched Ethan's to the stitch, navy canvas, tan leather straps, a worn-out patch near the bottom left corner that Ethan himself had sewn back on after a hike up in Big Bear. There was no doubt in her mind it was his. But what gnawed deeper than the visual familiarity was the question no one could answer. How had this footage, this unscripted scene, this unpolished moment, found its way into a fictional film supposedly written from imagination? Gloria took the USB drive and the printed screen caps directly to the detective who had handled Ethan's case years prior, now semi-retired but still consulting on cold cases. He watched the footage without commentary, leaned back in his creaky desk chair, and exhaled slowly. This wasn't shot for a movie, he said at last. This was found footage. With renewed urgency, authorities requested access to the full source files from the production company behind The Lost Path. After legal back and forth, the director, Nolan Ray, provided them under the condition of creative protection. Among hundreds of clips, some raw location shots, some rehearsals, some behind-the-scenes chatter, was one particular take labeled Scene 8, Overlook, Non-Actor Ref. In that clip, the actress portraying Elise stands alone on a bluff. She's wearing a windbreaker in faded teal, sunglasses perched atop her head. She holds a small vintage film camera in her right hand. She angles it toward the horizon, steps back, and smiles faintly before lifting it to her face. The camera she's holding is unmistakable, a 1976 Clearwater Super Zoom 50. Only 500 of them were ever manufactured by a now-defunct boutique camera shop in Southern California. The model had a distinctive crackle texture grip and a slightly offset lens mount, both clearly visible in the frame. Ethan had owned one, carefully sourced from a photography collector on the east side of Pasadena, and talked about it often in his old social media posts. In one particularly telling post, dated just 6 months before the disappearance, he shared a photo of the camera beside a half-full coffee mug. The caption read, "Old tools still work the best. She prefers film anyway." She, meaning Marissa. Detectives cross-referenced serial numbers. Gloria provided a photo of Ethan's camera, taken during a family barbecue. The film crew's camera didn't have the same serial, but matched the rare grip pattern of a limited-run batch made in a single month of production, September 1976. Only 12 units had that grip. The odds were astronomical. The deeper they dove, the more impossible the coincidences became. In a pivotal scene of the film, Elise asks Daniel to take her picture in front of a ridge. He hesitates. The camera, again handheld, captures her lifting the lens toward herself while Daniel turns away mid-step. His back is caught just off-center, shoulders angled, a shadow casting across his jawline. The frame freezes for a beat before a shutter click echoes, and then fades to black. It was identical. Not just similar, not just inspired, it was a shot-for-shot match of Marissa's last known selfie. Down to the slope of the hill behind them, the dappled light falling through the trees, the posture of the man's body beginning to walk away. Side-by-side comparisons, shared quietly among the investigation team, left no doubt. That scene wasn't written. It was recreated. The actress later admitted in a follow-up interview, recorded months before the controversy erupted, that the director had shown her a series of real images during pre-production to help her find the right mood. She didn't know where the photos had come from. She had assumed they were from anonymous online sources. When authorities brought this to Nolan Ray, he remained cryptic. "The stories we tell," he said in a recorded deposition, "are shaped by what we forget and what we choose to remember. Some images stay in the air longer than others." When pressed on how he had acquired the photo, he declined to elaborate, citing artistic license and private research. But the layers began to unravel. An assistant editor for the film, who asked to remain anonymous, came forward with an internal project note dated a year before filming. It included a Dropbox link, now expired, and the phrase E&M Archive, Ref folder. She hadn't questioned at the time. She thought it was just mood board material. Further inquiry revealed the Dropbox had once belonged to a freelance videographer named Chris Halter, who had interned briefly at Atlas Media, the same company where Ethan had worked. Halter's resume listed a side gig, collecting urban folklore stories and uploading aesthetic visual references to niche indie filmmakers. And then another layer cracked open. A local Reddit thread titled, "Missing in L.A." The vanishing couple, dated back to 2018, buried under years of inactivity, suddenly saw new traffic. In it, a user named ZoomLens87 had posted a blurred version of Marissa's final photo, captioned, "It's always about what happens after the smile." The post received little attention at the time, but now investigators believed it may have been the seed that grew into the lost path. Gloria, reviewing all of this from her kitchen table, felt a strange mixture of fury and fear. Someone, somewhere, had seen more than they claimed. Someone had known details never released to the public, the camera, the stance, the quote. And someone had built a film around that memory. She replayed the movie once more. In one scene, a fleeting background detail emerged. A faint shape caught in reflection from a pool of water near the overlook, a sliver of blue fabric, maybe a backpack, maybe nothing. But for those who knew what had vanished, every glimmer, every misplaced frame felt like a whisper. As the investigation deepened into the curious origins of the lost path, more connections began surfacing, subtle at first, then increasingly impossible to ignore. While media attention reignited in small waves, it was the quiet persistence of Gloria Morales and a group of internet sleuths that began piecing together something far more unsettling. The film might not only be inspired by Ethan and Marissa's story, it might have physically originated from it. A researcher named Hallie Kim, working on a podcast about unsolved disappearances, decided to investigate the backgrounds of the film's production team. Digging through university archives, alumni event flyers, and property rental records, she uncovered a detail that changed everything. Nolan Ray, the film's director, had been a third-year film student at UCLA in 2017. That same year, rental records showed he leased an apartment on Oakwood Avenue, a small unit in a 3-story walk-up near Griffith Park. The unit had been vacant for nearly 9 months following the abrupt disappearance of its previous tenants, Ethan Morales and Marissa Young. The connection wasn't mentioned in press kits. Nolan had never discussed the apartment publicly. But Hallie found a maintenance report in the building's online records detailing a broken door hinge and water damage in Unit 3B, dated just 2 weeks before Nolan moved in. Cross-referencing those dates with police reports revealed it was the same unit Ethan and Marissa had vacated before disappearing. He had lived in their exact apartment. Hallie drove to the building to speak with the landlord, an older man who barely remembered tenant names, but clearly recalled the film kid who always filmed weird B-roll from the balcony. Nolan had reportedly been quiet, rarely home, but he once asked if he could access the building's roof for a sunset shot. He was denied, but one of the neighbors remembered seeing him filming down the hallway toward the stairwell. When asked if any of Ethan and Marissa's belongings had been left behind, the landlord said no, at least nothing personal. But the manager who supervised the unit turnover remembered a box. One little box in the closet, she recalled. Had some books, maybe a scarf. I called the leasing office about it. They told me to toss it. But I saw the next kid, Ray, looking through it later that week before we cleared out. The significance of this detail was not lost on Gloria. If Nolan had accessed even part of Ethan and Marissa's belongings, no matter how small, it explained how so many specific personal elements had ended up in his film. The camera, the necklace, even the exact phrasing Marissa once used online. But it wasn't just the lived-in space or the found box that raised concern. In the film's final credits, buried between the legal disclosures and music licensing notes, was a segment labeled Unused Visuals, Archive Ref. It flashed quickly, barely a second per clip, almost like a placeholder montage. Most viewers didn't notice it, but Hallie, reviewing the footage frame by frame, spotted something strange. One of the clips showed the Brush Canyon Trail, but the timestamp in the bottom right corner was visible for exactly 3 frames before fading out. September 23rd, 2018, 16:52 and 7 seconds. That was the precise day Ethan and Marissa disappeared. The shot was shaky, handheld, moving slowly along a dirt path bordered by familiar brush and a wooden post carved with graffiti that still existed today. The coloring was desaturated, the contrast heightened, and the center of the frame had been digitally blurred, as if to obscure a figure, a movement, or perhaps even a face. It wasn't a reenactment. It was footage from the day of their disappearance. When confronted by the producers, Nolan insisted the clip had been part of a found stock archive licensed from a contributor who had uploaded old hiking videos. He claimed it wasn't intentional, but when pressed to provide the original source or licensing agreement, he could not produce either. The metadata on the original project files had been stripped, either by accident or design. Authorities began reviewing other clips in the film's raw footage vault. Among them were multiple trail shots taken from strange angles, positions that would have required familiarity with the terrain. One, in particular, seemed to have been filmed from behind a tree overlooking the overlook where Marissa's selfie was taken. That angle had never been publicized in crime scene photos. It wasn't part of the standard hiker's path. It was as if whoever shot it knew where to hide. Further unsettling was the presence of background noise in that same clip, a low conversation, hard to distinguish beneath wind and crunching leaves. Audio experts enhanced it, pulling out fragments of words. A voicemail, soft but rushed, saying something close to "don't move." The production team, now under immense scrutiny, issued a public statement distancing themselves from Nolan's research process. The lead producer claimed he had trusted the director's creative vision and had not been aware of the extent to which real-life material may have been used without disclosure. Meanwhile, online discussion reignited with fervor. Reddit threads, Twitter theories, TikTok breakdowns all dissected the connection between the trail footage and the case. Gloria received hundreds of messages, most supportive, some disturbing. One anonymous user sent a screenshot of the blurred frame with the caption, "You're looking in the wrong direction." Investigators focused on Nolan's past. Background checks revealed no criminal history, but a pattern of obsessive behavior with found storylines. A former classmate recalled that Nolan once described his creative process as harvesting moments no one wants anymore. When asked about the apartment connection, Nolan offered no clear denial. "Some spaces hold echoes," he said in a brief radio interview. "You don't always know whose story you're walking through." To Gloria, that was not metaphor, it was confession. She requested access to any additional footage from the shoot. One assistant editor, no longer with the company, anonymously mailed her a burned DVD labeled Original Trail Log, ACAM. When she opened it, it began with static, then a long continuous shot of the main trail, empty, leaves blue across the path. Then movement. Far in the distance, 2 figures, one with a ponytail, one taller, wearing a cap. The time code flickered. September 23rd, 2018, 16:19 and 42 seconds. Marissa had posted her selfie at 4:17 p.m. This frame was 30 seconds before, and in the corner, barely noticeable, someone else holding a camera, pointed directly at them. The weight of the frame, showing 2 blurred figures at the trail's edge, haunted Gloria for nights. She knew what she saw, even if the image quality left room for doubt. There was no mistaking Marissa's posture, her stride, the familiar dip in her shoulder when she walked uphill. And right beside her, Ethan, just as she remembered him from every family photo, tall, slightly hunched forward, always with one hand tucked into his jacket pocket. But it was the third shape that gnawed at her, a shadowy figure crouched low, holding a camera, the lens directed unmistakably at the couple. She couldn't sleep. Her hands trembled as she drafted the email. It was addressed to one of the assistant editors from Nolan Ray's team, the one who had anonymously sent her the DVD days earlier. She didn't ask for explanations. She asked for everything. Every raw clip, every cut scene, every second that never made it past the timeline. To her surprise, a reply came less than 24 hours later. The editor's tone was direct but cautious. He explained that during the editing phase, dozens of hours of footage had been logged, but unused, especially from the director's inspiration shoots, a vague term they all had learned not to question. These clips were stored on external drives labeled Scout Day 1 through Scout Day 4. He offered to send digital copies of the logs. 2 days later, a drive arrived at Gloria's doorstep via overnight courier and signed, "No return address." She didn't open alone. She drove it directly to the detective's office. Within hours, analysts were reviewing each file. Most were unremarkable. Shaky shots of empty trails, quiet rustling trees, half conversations between crew members about lighting or sound quality. But one file, timestamped just after 5 p.m. on the day Ethan and Marissa vanished, stood out. Labeled Scout_3B_alt_Camby MOV, it began with a wide shot of the canyon ridgeline, then panned slowly to the left. The movement seemed almost accidental, like someone was testing the angle. At second 28, the camera hesitated near a slope thick with brush. Behind the green foliage, partially obscured by shadow and motion blur, something dark glinted in the light, a shape slumped, unmoving. Investigators isolated the frame, enhanced it, and there it was, a black backpack, faint but discernible, not tossed casually, not buried, but propped as if someone had slid it behind the bush with deliberate intent. Detectives revisited the old evidence list from 2018. Marissa's inventory had noted a black, One Earth, eco-hiking backpack, custom ordered from a small California retailer that no longer existed. It had a signature logo, a minimalist globe with an arrow circling it, stitched into the shoulder strap in pale green. The company had only produced that specific run in 2016. The blurry frame showed a strap. Zoomed in, enhanced under digital filters, the pattern appeared. A pale green loop, unmistakably the One Earth mark. They had found her backpack. The discovery, while still indirect, was enough to formally reopen the case. LAPD issued a press statement confirming that new visual evidence had surfaced in connection to the 2018 missing persons case of Morales and Young. A task force was reassigned. Within 48 hours, the footage site was revisited. The coordinates were extracted from embedded metadata in the video file, a feature left behind by the original camera. It pinpointed a section of the ridge approximately 0.7 miles east of the known trail, near a worn path likely formed by deer or experienced climbers. When officers and search volunteers reached the area, the brush had grown thick with years of drought-resistant regrowth. But beneath one of the low shrubs, they found compacted earth, flattened in a way that didn't align with animal bedding. A small indentation, about the size of a backpack. No bag remained, no fibers, but the soil was still looser than the area surrounding it, possibly disturbed more recently than expected. Forensics began soil sampling. As news spread, the debate flared online. Had someone moved the bag? Had it remained hidden for years before someone, perhaps the filmmakers, discovered it? Or was it placed after the disappearance and before the shoot, unintentionally captured by Nolan's crew? Nolan Ray, through legal counsel, denied any knowledge of the backpack or its significance. All footage used in location scouting was shot legally, on public lands, and to our knowledge contains no criminal content or evidence, his statement read. But the credibility of that defense frayed further as more footage surfaced, unofficial, untagged clips from hard drives quietly released to authorities by an unnamed crew member. One file, just 6 seconds long, recorded by a secondary camera during the same trail shoot, showed an accidental zoom pull. In the corner of the frame, barely focused, was a flash of red cloth, possibly a shirt, possibly a flag, but the shade matched the color Marissa had worn in the final selfie. The slow-motion analysis revealed nothing more. But pattern recognition software aligned the terrain with the area previously searched. The search radius narrowed. Gloria watched all this unfold with a strange stillness. She was no longer the frantic mother plastering posters along the fence. She was something quieter now, sharper, more certain. Something had been left behind, not by accident, but by choice, something placed just outside visibility, waiting, knowing someday someone would look a little closer. And now, after all these years, the mountains seemed to whisper back. The coordinates extracted from the scout footage, once paired with recent soil analysis, pointed investigators to a ridge just beyond the trail's formal boundary, a slope known for loose shale and minor erosion, overlooked during earlier searches due to its instability and dense brush. The ground there had changed subtly over the past years. What once had been a solid hillside was now marked by uneven terrain, evidence of at least one small landslide following the heavy rains of early 2021. The area had never been scanned thoroughly before due to safety concerns, but the task force now, reinvigorated and outfitted with geosurvey equipment and private wilderness specialists, made the call to dig. The search began cautiously. GPR units, ground-penetrating radar, swept slowly across the slope, producing heat maps of subsurface disturbances. After several hours, a technician flagged a pocket approximately 3 feet below the surface where soil density dropped sharply. Shovels gave way to careful troweling. They worked quietly, steadily, peeling back years of sediment and root entanglement. And then something pale. At first it looked like a piece of quartz or perhaps sun-bleached wood. But when a forensic anthropologist brushed it free and exposed the contour of a jawline, everything stopped. The team cordoned off the site immediately. Over the next 14 hours, they unearthed the upper torso of a male skeleton, partially intact, still clothed in fragments of what had once been a button-down shirt, light blue with a fine pinstripe. The collar and cuffs had disintegrated, but a triangular patch of inner lining remained, and within it a brand tag, Bridge and Oak, a boutique label Ethan had worn often. Near the spine, tucked beneath the weight of collapsed stone and mud, was a single hiking boot, sole still intact, matching the exact model Ethan had purchased months before the disappearance. The remains were airlifted for analysis. Gloria was notified in person. She didn't speak much when the news came, just nodded, gently touched her pendant, and asked only one question. Was it peaceful? The initial autopsy showed no signs of external trauma, no fractures consistent with a weapon, no lacerations, no bone markings that would suggest struggle. The body, though incomplete, had been largely protected by the compacted soil and rock, and the surrounding pattern indicated a sudden downward slide, consistent with an accidental fall. Forensic geologists confirmed the site had likely experienced a shallow landslide within months of the disappearance, enough to displace topsoil and obscure the slope's original shape. DNA results came back in less than a week. It was Ethan. He had died there, not long after the last selfie. Detectives reconstructed the possible scenario. It was late afternoon when the couple likely veered off the main trail, either by accident or in search of a view. The bluff where Marissa had taken the photo wasn't far from the site. If they continued east along the ridge, they would have encountered that treacherous slope. It was easy to misjudge terrain, especially when the ground appeared firm. Perhaps Ethan had stepped too close to the edge. Perhaps he had reached back to help Marissa. Perhaps the ground shifted before either could react. And yet, there was no sign of her. The discovery raised as many questions as it answered. If Ethan had fallen and died instantly, why had Marissa not sought help? Why hadn't she returned to the parking lot? Why had both phones gone dark at nearly the same time? And most pressing of all, where was she? Gloria clung to one detail in particular. Ethan's body had been undisturbed by animals or weather for years. That minute had been covered quickly, almost completely, possibly in the same week he vanished. Had Marissa buried him, covered him with branches in grief or panic, or had someone else? The investigation shifted tone once more. What began as a disappearance, and then a mystery, now teetered toward a more harrowing possibility. That Ethan's death, while likely accidental, might not have been the end of the story, but the beginning of something worse. They expanded the search radius again, this time focusing not on geology but psychology, trying to understand what a person would do after witnessing their partner fall, what path they might take if in shock, injured, or threatened. And all the while, that single frame from the film footage haunted them, a third figure holding a camera, watching from the brush. The discovery of Ethan's remains was supposed to bring closure, a final answer after 7 years of hollow speculation. But instead it deepened the ache, reawakening questions that no one could silence. For Gloria, the confirmation of her son's death offered a bitter clarity. He had not vanished into thin air, had not run away, had not staged anything. He had fallen, likely within an hour of that last smiling photograph. His death had been sudden, unmarked by violence. But the absence of Marissa cast a shadow over the relief. There was no matching grave, no bones, no necklace, no signs of her ever having been there at all beyond what had already been found. The shoe, the backpack, the now fragile remains of presence that might just as easily have been placed after the fact. The renewed search turned south, quite literally. From the slope where Ethan was found, boot prints led down toward a narrow natural funnel in the hillside, an area once studied in the early days of the investigation but dismissed due to flooding risks. Now, with data and topographic simulations, investigators traced what could have been a viable descent path. And near the edge, under the roots of a long-dead tree, they uncovered something faint, a pattern in the mud, fossilized more than preserved, the heel-to-toe shape of a lightweight trail shoe. The size matched Marissa's. There were 3 prints, each slightly offset, indicating someone walking cautiously downhill, possibly injured, possibly alone. But the prints ended abruptly. The rains that had come days after their disappearance, those same rains that led to the landslide that buried Ethan, had also washed away everything else. The search extended weeks beyond that discovery, but yielded nothing further. Cadaver dogs picked up no scent, no disturbed soil revealed bones, and no wildlife pattern suggested a body had ever decayed in that stretch of land. Forensics experts said it was possible, especially in open terrain, over 7 years, in shifting climate cycles, that any organic remains could have been scattered or degraded beyond recognition. But even that seemed too clean. She had vanished. Voluntarily or not, no one could say. Gloria met with Elaine one final time, after all the new evidence had been reviewed. They stood at the overlook again, the same place where the photo had been taken, now cordoned off with temporary fencing as a crime-adjacent scene. The wind was sharp, colder than it should have been in early spring. Gloria handed Elaine a copy of the lab report, folded neatly in her coat pocket. Elaine didn't read it. She looked out across the hills and said only she was alive after he fell. I know she was, but whether she left to find help or left because of something else, I don't think we'll ever know. Gloria had no answer. In a final attempt to bring the story full circle, Hallie Kim, the podcaster who had uncovered the apartment link, secured an interview with Nolan Ray. It wasn't broadcast. She recorded it in private, at a cafe near Venice Beach. Using a discreet lapel, Mike Nolan appeared calm, tired, maybe resigned. When asked directly whether he had known Ethan and Marissa before beginning the film, he paused. Not personally, he said, but I live in their space. I walk their steps every day for a year. It's hard not to absorb that. Hallie asked him about the footage, the third figure, the blurred backpack, the trail sequence that had led to Ethan's discovery. Nolan looked away, then back. I didn't shoot that, he said quietly. I found it. The footage was already on a used SD card I bought from a pawn shop in Silver Lake. I didn't think it was real. I thought it was staged, like some failed student project. Why include it? She pressed. Because it felt real, he said. Because whoever filmed it saw something they weren't supposed to see. Or maybe they didn't realize what they were seeing until later. I don't know, but it didn't feel like fiction. At the end of their conversation, as Hallie was packing up her recorder, Nolan offered one last comment. Unsolicited, unprompted. I don't know if she's still alive, he said, almost to himself. But someone walked away. Someone kept going. And someone else was left behind. In the final edit of The Lost Path, now shelved by its distributors but still circulating in fragments online, the last scene plays without music. It's a long shot of the overlook, empty this time, no actors, no dialogue. Just wind. And then the camera pans slowly left toward the southern ridge. In the far distance, the suggestion of a figure walking away. It's too blurry to tell if it's a man or woman. The figure moves down the slope, steady, small against the vast California sky. The screen fades to black. No credits roll. Just a silence that asks more than it answers. If you've made it this far into the story, consider subscribing for more true mystery narratives that leave you questioning what really happened. Which part of this case struck you the most? Do you believe Marissa made it out? Or is there something still hidden in those hills? Let us know in the comments and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one.